welcome to Progressive Soup. We've been gone all of about 5 minutes, and now we're back, and we're going to talk about the environment in Puerto Rico, because as our audience has some knowledge, I'm sure, the United States does a lot of munitions and military armament testing in Puerto Rico at a place called Vieques, and there's been quite a bit of damage done to the environment there, and I'm going to let you gentlemen explain what has happened, what the history of the environmental impact there is, where we are now, and how to correct it.
Can I just start with that?
Sure.
Back in the 1930s, according to the Nationalist Party, and the United States was, the United States government, let's put it this way, or the corporations, I should say, were experimenting with bacteria. They had sick cows and all kinds of other animals, and the Puerto Rican Nationalist Party denounced that as being a crime against the Puerto Rican nation, because if those germs escaped, then it would kill the whole nation, the whole Puerto Rican nation. So Don Pedro Albizu Campos went to jail for 10 years for advocating independence and for bringing that issue about experimenting in Puerto Rico to the open. In fact, the whole Nationalist Party leadership went to jail for advocating independence and denouncing all that.
And so you're speaking, I think, of maybe mad cow disease? Or something,
no,
maybe something
that wasn't
similar
known
to that.
in those days, as far as I know.
Oh, okay.
But they were, I think they were experimenting for bacteriological warfare, and they were doing it in Puerto Rico.
Now, is this post World War I or
this is after World War I?
Because there was a lot of things used in World War I. I think mustard gas and things of that nature that were used in battle, and they probably had the germ of, no pun intended, the germ of the idea of biological warfare at that point. And of course, you're speaking about that biological warfare as coming into play, testing those things out.
Well, you know, the sad thing is that many of these inhumane experiments that American corporations and the military have done, carried out in Puerto Rico, they're done not with the will of the American people, and in fact it's done at the backs of the American people. They are not informed of what's going on, just like the Puerto Rican people are ignorant of them. For example, in the 1950s, tens of thousands of Puerto Rican women were submitted to all types of experiments with birth control pills. And for many years, many women were having deformed children, for example, and many lost, had miscarriages and so on, but they didn't know what was going on. And it was all these experiments that were going on with birth control pills and other experiments with Puerto Rican women that they didn't know anything about, we didn't know anything about, up until practically the 1970s and 1980s. And the same thing happened with the same way that the American military, for example, again, not with the will of the American people, bombed and exploded nuclear bombs close to Bikini. That's why we have the word bikini out in the Pacific, and these beautiful people, these beautiful islands were just totally attacked and destroyed with radiation for many decades. The same thing happened in Puerto Rico, where the U.S. military used for many decades, up until the beginning of the 21st century, Vieques for basically as a target range, and they bombarded the island mercilessly. The population of Vieques was displaced. Half of the population was sent to, almost half of the population to the Virgin Islands. Another sizable part was brought to Humacao, Naguabo, the eastern coast of Puerto Rico. And the island was just used as a target range, and even depleted uranium was used in Puerto Rico before it was even used in the first war against Iraq in the 1990s. So, you know, Puerto Rico has a long history of, unfortunately, being submitted to all types of experiments, unbeknownst to the American population and unknowingly also to the Puerto Rican people.
Now, our service personnel, you know, folks, Americans that have been in the military, particularly in the first Gulf War and the current Gulf War, depleted uranium is something they're very familiar with, because I know individuals personally that were exposed to depleted uranium, and because of that, their immune systems are essentially shot. I mean, these are just enlisted people in the United States Army that cleaned off weaponry that had been used in conjunction with depleted uranium, and just that much exposure to that has left them with immune systems that are basically non-existent. Where you and I get a cold, they get pneumonia. And so certainly those folks that have been in the military can relate to what we're talking to here. But tell me more about the experimentation.
Okay, can I tell you something?
Yes.
Okay, back in the decades of the 40s and 50s, 1/3 of the Puerto Rican women were sterilized, and the government here was denouncing Hitler to be genocidal. Meanwhile, they were doing that in Puerto Rico, sterilizing women of 1/3. That's a big percentage
Yes, it
of the
is.
population to be sterilized, and that is not hardly that's hardly known here in the United States. Even among progressive people, they don't know about that.
That's the kind of thing that, as you say, that we denounced in our own personal enemies, the Nazis, doing things to Jewish Europeans and gypsies and other
Right.
people that the Nazis deemed undesirable and used in some horrific experimentations. But you're saying that the same thing was done to the degree that 1/3 of the women of childbearing age in Puerto Rico were sterilized?
Were sterilized, yes.
And of course, these experiments and similar experiments have been going on for many, many years, but people don't really know what is going on. And hopefully someday the books will be open and we will know what's going on. We do know also that, for example, I'm from the town of Las Piedras. Las Piedras has been known for many years as the capital of the pharmaceuticals in Puerto Rico. And, you know, the major pharmaceuticals in the United States have their offices in Las Piedras. There's another town which also has many, many dozens of pharmaceuticals in Puerto Rico, which is Manatí. That's on the northern coast. Las Piedras is towards the eastern coast. Manatí is towards the northern coast of Puerto Rico. But in any case, these pharmaceuticals are spread out throughout Puerto Rico. My town before Vieques today is the island municipality which has the highest level of cancer. But before Vieques, it was Las Piedras, or after Vieques comes Las Piedras, because of these the presence of all these pharmaceuticals, which, for example, have contaminated all the underwater sources, the currents of water, aquifers in Las Piedras, and they do the same thing in Manatí and throughout Puerto Rico. They just take over these water sources without the permission of the government and just totally contaminate them. And these things go on, again, without the permission and without the desire of the American working people.
Or the knowledge of
but
the
it goes
Puerto
on.
Rican
But it happens.
Is there any testing of water in Puerto Rico? I know there in some places in the United States we test our water carefully, and probably a lot of places in the United States we don't. Is there any testing of the water to determine public health menaces and public health danger?
It's interesting because that's one of the few advantages of colonialism, and even pro-independence supporters sometimes have to ironically point that out. Not that we don't think that we will do a better job of it, being an independent country, but being under United States domination, military, economic, and political right now, American law in this sense is better than Puerto Rican law, because if it were not for the EPA, the federal authorities which try to, in a certain way, implement federal laws regarding the environment in Puerto Rico, if it was left to the colonial authorities of Puerto Rico, they would just open up the doors totally, completely, and allow these corporations to do whatever they want in Puerto Rico.
So the Environmental Protection Agency
EPA,
holds sway legally in Puerto Rico because of the state of the relationship between
because of the colonial relationship between Puerto Rico and the United States. They have authority or control over these matters in Puerto Rico, and so as a result, very often even people that support environmentalists or community activists have to refer to federal laws, environmental laws, to try to get a little bit of justice, because the corporations would just take over and ruin everything, and the local corrupt politicians of Puerto Rico would also, who are sold out to these big interests, would also allow them to do whatever they want. Our solution, of course, is to grant Puerto Rico total independence, and hopefully under not only independent but a socialist system in which things will be a little bit more democratic. Working people and communities in general in Puerto Rico will be able to control the environment. But as it is right now, ironically, it is the federal authorities which help a little bit in this area.
Yes.
Can I ask something?
Yes.
Okay, the Environmental Protection Agency on many occasions sell themselves to the corporations, and they allow the corporations here in the United States to pollute the waters, the rivers, and the air here in the United States. That's one thing that, so I wouldn't be surprised if they do the same thing in Puerto Rico.
And I'm sure that they do. I'm just pointing, I'm not saying that they're, that they're the saviors of the situation.
Right.
It's just that it's very ironic. But Hector is correct. I mean, there is so much corruption and such a marriage right between the big corporate interests and all of these federal agencies that it's almost impossible to separate them. But in the colonial situation of Puerto Rico, it's just been ironic over the years that people have had to.
In the same way that the American colonies would have been over a period of many generations at the mercy of whoever happened to be the King of England or Queen of England, and how merciful or non-merciful they were. Puerto Rico has been at the behest of whoever happens to be President of the United States, because the President controls what happens, what the Environmental Protection Agency actually does. And of course now we've got a President who is much more environmentally concerned, let's say, than the previous President.
Well, at least at least in terms of his speeches, he has demonstrated more sincerity and more concern. Although, of course, I have to, unfortunately, my opinion is that he has not really, in practice, up until now, really implemented anything that is different. And I think from what we saw in Copenhagen recently, we didn't see any big strides forwards or anything decisive that is in the interest of our home, which, in the bigger sense, and to be honest, we don't believe in these frontiers of Puerto Rico, of Mexico, of Germany, of Nigeria. It's all one big home. History has forced upon us this illusion of divisions and of boundaries and frontiers. We're all independent in every sense of the word, and we
as you said before we actually came on the air, we are in fact one planet.
We're one planet. Yeah.
We are one planet, or we are one people, and we have all of what matters to us is really mutual in nature.
Okay, let's not forget the fact that depleted uranium affects human beings, but it affects microscopic life. We depend on microscopic life, and then it affects all the other animals on Earth. So this depleted uranium is a horrific weapon that works against even those that use them.
Just as in the United States, you have organizations, for example, like Greenpeace, and many, you have hundreds of environmental groups throughout the country which try to make sure that the government and the corporations do not carry forth policies which are harmful to the environment. In Puerto Rico, you have organizations like Misión Industrial and other smaller groups spread out, which have a mission specifically of trying to protect the environment. In fact, a person who had led that organization, Misión Industrial, an environmentalist, his name Neftali Garcia, about a decade ago, 15 years ago, he ran for the Senate and almost won. He came very close to winning as an independent candidate. Interestingly, that is independent of these big corporate controlled. So there's a desire, there's interest on the masses of Puerto Ricans. And a love of nature also, just like there is here. Unfortunately, they don't have the ruling voice. The ones that really decide everything that has pertinence to the environment is just like it is here. Just like the small community does not have control over its local environment in Puerto Rico. Also, these corporations go in there and they do what they want.
So the same way that in the United States, the federal law trumps state law, which trumps local law. Likewise, in Puerto Rico. United States federal law trumps everything else.
Okay, I would say that the people of the United States and the people of the United States are an internal colony of the corporate interest, just as we are too. See, I see the people of the United States as another colony, but the colony happens to be inside of the heart of the empire. Let's put it this way.
The heart of the empire.
But I see the same thing. The U.S. people are also a colony That's the way I see it.
So in a sense, we're all one as individuals. We're all one, as opposed to these controlling interests. You know, these what we all worry about. We all worry about Big Brother. We all worry about forces, external forces controlling us, rather than us having the opportunity as individuals and as groups to control our own lives.
Well, you know,
Exactly.
it's all becoming smaller and smaller and more integrated. The internet, television, all these things, for example, right now, your typical 18, 19-year-old working class kid in Puerto Rico is probably on the internet. Checking out some website in the United States, just like your typical teenager in the United States right now may be on the internet checking out some website in Britain or in Germany or in Los Angeles or whatever, and so on and so forth around the world. We're all becoming closer, and this is, at least from our point of view, the only solution in the long run is precisely increasing, not diminishing, reducing this communication, but rather increasing the communication, breaking down all these phony barriers between the people of all the world, and hopefully also specifically when we're talking about working people throughout Puerto Rico, the United States, Latin America, moving together. You know, we see there are big winds of change going on in Latin America right now. There's a lot of hostility, unfortunately, from the government of the United States towards the government of Venezuela, but we think that many of the changes that are going on there right now are positive changes because they're bringing a broader democracy to that country.
Hugo Chavez.
With Hugo Chavez, we see something very similar where, for example, an indigenous leader in Bolivia, overwhelmingly, I mean, 60% of the vote wins. 63% of the vote wins in Bolivia. You have the same thing in Uruguay, where this person who used to be a guerrilla fighter wins also with overwhelmingly more than 60%, 63, 65% of the vote. And people are leaving behind these sectarianisms and divisions that they had in the past, and they're working more and more together throughout Latin America, and they're becoming more and more integrated. We believe that the future of Puerto Rico is with that further integration of Latin America, and doing it hopefully in a peaceful way, and just looking for more social justice. And we're also very hopeful that American people in this country will be able to impose some type of a peace on President Obama. Obama ran, you know, on a platform of peace, against war, of justice for the environment, and we're hopeful that American people can bring Obama around to that agenda, which is the reason why so many people voted for him.
Now I want to take a step backwards, because you said indigenous. An indigenous leader was elected in a country. Now, define indigenous. I kind of understand what it means, but clarify for me what indigenous means.
Well, it's interesting. Indigenous is not really. We think of it sometimes as being something genetic, but it's interesting that in many countries of Latin America, for example, a person who is genetically, DNA, whatever, is indigenous, but who is raised up in an urban center and no longer speaks the language.
So it's more a cultural issue.
It's a cultural and genetic issue, right, exactly, because then that person no longer considers himself or herself indigenous, and she can't, because they don't speak the same language. They can no longer, very often, if they wanted to, they cannot live in that indigenous society.
Okay, so it's nature versus nurture. So a person could be indigenous in a
DNA,
in a sense of their DNA. But not be indigenous in terms of their culture, and vice versa. They could be indigenous,
I would say, more
culturally, but even though they're not indigenous in terms of their family.
I would say indigenous is more not only the genetic, the DNA makeup of a person, but it's the whole cultural, the whole worldview. Very often in European culture, we think in terms of time being linear. And one thing I think that is indigenous to people in Africa, Asia, Latin America, and even in Europe. Europeans before, I would say possibly the 1500s, they also saw life as circular. Things as circular, not so much in this linear thing, and not so rigid. And I think it's also still there in indigenous Europeans. I think there is still that fight between that historic culture of Europe and this new culture that has emerged as a result of mercantilism and as a result of the capitalism that developed in the 18th century. But I think there is a solution, and it's looking for those indigenous roots of all cultures on the planet.
Well, I'm thinking Central American, and you say things being circular, and I'm thinking of the Mayan calendar, which is circular, and many other cultures throughout the world. Well, our clock is circular, historically. So people think in terms of, at least internally, they think in terms of everything coming around full circle, like the seasons coming around full circle. But you were going to add...
Yeah, I would say that, you know, in Europe, you still have indigenous Europeans. For example, in the northern Sweden, you have the Lapps.
The Lapps, yeah.
And in Spain, you have the Basque.
The Basque.
They speak a language that's totally different from Greek or Latin or...
Even though they're situated between Spain and France, as you say, the language really doesn't sound Spanish or French.
No, it isn't. It isn't. Those are indigenous people. Now, there are indigenous people in Mexico or in Latin America that do not speak Spanish at all. See?
Oh.
Their names, some of their names, like in Mexico, might be Spanish names, but they don't speak Spanish. The same in Philippines, people have Spanish names, see, but they don't speak Spanish. Spain wasn't able to conquer the Philippines totally or Latin America.
Aren't these generally mountainous regions of the world? Because we think in terms of the area between, say, Pakistan and Afghanistan, mountainous regions where time sort of stands still, and people... No countries, no empires can actually conquer them because of the nature of the terrain. Maybe that's part of it, that inaccessibility, or we mentioned with the Lapps, up in an area that, who the heck wants to own that part of the world except people that whose families have been there for thousands of years.
And that were pushed there by other dominant groups, so they had no choice.
We wanted also to get back onto the idea of the options for Puerto Rico, future options. There are, as you explained, two dominant points of view on where Puerto Rico should go. Explain those 2 points of view, and then we'll compare and contrast them.
Well, basically,
go ahead. You could explain one, and then I'll explain another, and then we'll mix.
Well, I was just going to say that today one of the great strides that has taken place in Puerto Rico as compared to, let's say, even 30 years ago, is that all the political organizations, parties in Puerto Rico recognize that Puerto Rico is a colony of the United States. Even the pro-U.S. forces, the Statehooders in the New Progressive Party, even the people that defend the present system, the Free Associated State that was founded in 1852 through Luis Muñoz Marin, even they recognize that this is a colonial status and they want to enhance it, as they say, with more powers. Of course, the only people that have said from the very beginning, from the get-go of the invasion, have been we pro-independence and pro-socialist, who have always said that Puerto Rico is a U.S. colony, and the only way that Puerto Rico could really achieve self-determination is through independence. In my opinion,
there's no separation. This much separation doesn't work. It's got to be complete separation. Independence, and then to interaction between the two countries.
Well, but it's interesting, because when we say independence, we don't say that Puerto Rico is going to go off like an asteroid or out in outer space and work. Obviously, Puerto Rico has to get independence, and then as an independent nation, decide how it's going to relate with the United States in some type of a social and economic relationship, as the same way with Latin America. But also, I think one of the key differences today, as perhaps the independence movement of, let's say, 30 or 40 years ago, is that most people who are pro-independence today recognize that in order for Puerto Rico to achieve independence, that the working class, the working people of Puerto Rico, whether it be through their labor unions, community organizations, environmental organizations or whatever, women's organizations, gay, transgender organizations, sexual organizations, and so on, that all of these groups who have the best interests of Puerto Rico, but especially the working people who produce the wealth, they are the ones that are going to lead this fight for Puerto Rican self-determination. That is not going to be something coming from the United States. It's not going to be something coming from the wealthy elite of Puerto Rico. It's not going to be something like, for example, in the United States, when the U.S. reached independence, it was because there was a wealthy elite, a bourgeoisie, a ruling class, a capitalist class that was emerging that promised greater democracy. And so it was for the United States for a long period. Today in Puerto Rico, that class which opens up the future of a more democratic Puerto Rico, in our opinion, is the Puerto Rican working class.
Okay, and you were going to explain the position of the other large.
Yeah, well, the pro-statehooders claim that Puerto Rico could have, I think it's 5 congressmen. Okay, but anyway, say it's 5, 6, or whatever. And then they claim that Puerto Rico could have 2 senators, and that then we would have equality. But according to what I have read, and according to the way I feel, those 5 Congress persons from Puerto Rico and those 2 senators would be put in the pocket of the Congress of the United States, and Puerto Rico would still be a colony. Puerto Rico still separated from the mainland of the United States, which means that still products imported into Puerto Rico using United States, the merchant marine, would still be 25% more expensive, like in Hawaii. You know, Hawaii being an island doesn't help. If Hawaii was contiguous to the United States, then it would be different. But it's an island. And by the way, Hawaii was made a state, not by the Hawaiians, but by the foreigners that went there to control Hawaii. Now, the same thing would be in Puerto Rico. We're still an island, and the fact, so statehood doesn't fit us. Okay.
So we're going to have to wrap it up there.
Okay.
And we'll come back. We'll have Hector and Daniel back for additional shows and talk more about these and other very important subjects.
Okay.
Thank you very much. This has been Progressive Soup. My name is David Stevenson.
Okay.
Hector Lopez.
David, thanks a lot.
Daniel Vila. Thank you very much. Good evening. Perfect.
Okay, we take a look.